So my name is Sharon Hammond and we farm quite close to the town of Landrindod in mid Wales. We have another 2 farms, one about 2 miles away where I now actually live, and one about 5 or 6 miles away where my older son Stuart lives. I wasn't born and brought up on a farm. My father was a builder. So I saw farming all around me. Some of my grandparents had actually come from farming stock as well, so there were plenty of stories about farming. You know, I've got a very early memory of the farmer at the bottom of our garden putting hay up onto the trailer with a pitchfork. And when I got older into teenage, I became interested in YFC. My mother had been a YFC member herself. And joined YFC, and I think, as they say, the rest is history. That's where I met and eventually married my husband and became a full-time farmer. One of the things, not so much from my family that I married into, but from other people, was a sort of a shock horror. Well, how are you going to cope? You weren't born and brought up on a farm, so you won't understand what you're marrying into. But I have to say that my husband's family were actually very welcoming. And this was after only going out with my husband for a few months. I was there one day for tea and he said, "Oh, Sharon could row up for us." So I was given a very hasty lesson in driving the tractor and rowing up, and put onto a tractor which had no cab, just a roll bar, and left to row up a field. My mother-in-law worked out on the farm an awful lot. And so it was just accepted that that's what you did. You were part of the team. I then progressed to eventually doing all sorts of jobs, mowing when we were harvesting, anything that needed to be done. In farming, I think the people who influenced me the most, first of all, is my late husband, who actually was an incredibly laid-back, generous person. My father-in-law was a very forward-looking farmer. He also was a very generous person. After about 12 months, my father-in-law decided that I was just the person to fill in all their forms for them. I think it was that generosity and that love of farming that they imparted to me. I've now got 5 grandsons. Not that it, necessarily boys farm and girls don't, but the next generation is there already, waiting to take over. But essentially, it's now down to my 2 sons to run the farm, because sadly their father, in his 50s, was diagnosed with Parkinson's and early onset dementia. So they both came home and really had to step up and start running the farm on their own from a very early age. They both keenly felt the loss of their father in terms of having that mentor and his wisdom to pass on, and that was a role that I had to step up into quite quickly. But also it did provide them with an opportunity because they had both come home from university hungry to progress. They went into broiler chickens, they changed the cattle, they changed the sheep. We now have all Romney sheep. Also into alternative energy, because we have biomass boilers to heat the chicken sheds, we have solar panels. And they probably encountered slightly less resistance than they might have done had their father still been part of the farming business. There's such a passion and pride amongst farming people, and also a sense of community, of helping each other out. Nobody wants to turn out poor animals. Nobody wants their neighbours to be driving past to see their field covered in weeds. If anybody's in trouble or stuck, a neighbour will come along with the machine that's needed or just the labour that's needed to help them out. It's that sense of community where everybody pulls together when somebody's in trouble. I do have to remember that I have been in farming now for nearly 50 years, which is a lifetime really, isn't it? I somehow feel that the last sort of 18 months to 2 years have been some of the most challenging that I remember. The hike in energy prices, the hike in feed prices, and the rise in interest rates. The amount of paperwork and record keeping and inspections that we have. You know, the number of inspections, we're under a lot of scrutiny, and we're actually expecting our next inspection next week, having only just had one about 2 weeks ago. So when people think that farmers are just doing what they want and getting away with blue murder, basically, that's not true, because we actually are very closely regulated. So I've never shied away from inviting people to the farm to actually tell our side of the story. A lot is said about the fact that people are becoming more disconnected from how their food is produced. When my mother-in-law was doing farm tours, which is back in the 1970s, one of the things she did was she picked up a hen for the children to stroke. And one of the children said to her, "Coo, miss, how did you get all those feathers on it?" Because that child had only ever seen a chicken ready to eat in a shop, so didn't realise that chickens actually had feathers. Welfare of our livestock is absolutely everything. If our livestock are not doing well, what we're doing has no purpose, because poor livestock will not sell well and will not make you money. That's why we turn out in the middle of the night to check on cattle. That's why you'll find farmers out in the middle of a field in a gale. And if I think back to the snow of 1982, you know, my husband and his two brothers walked 5 or 6 miles carrying bales on their back to make sure that the sheep were fed every day. The skills that I learned and honed in YFC have stood me in very good stead throughout my life. So even after my husband and I were too old to compete, we remained very closely involved with the Young Farmers Movement. Take every opportunity that comes your way. I often say we should never beat ourselves up with sticks over things that we've done that haven't worked out well. Probably my route into farming was not perhaps more drastic than you need to do to marry into it. But there are opportunities out there, and I think perhaps increasingly now opportunities out there. And if you've got the drive and the enthusiasm and the willingness to learn and the willingness to sometimes take risks, I think the sky's your limit. For me, farming is not just a way of life, it's actually a whole community where people look out for each other. And I think that's the really best thing about it, is that sense of community and that sense of oneness and that sense of looking out for each other, which I've really cherished over the years.